Brigadier General Angela Washington stood in line at the Fort Hood, Maine exchange, waiting to buy a bottle of water and a phone charger. She wore civilian clothes, khaki pants, and a simple blue polo shirt, having just returned from visiting her daughter at Texas A&M University. At 51, with her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and reading glasses perched on her nose, she looked more like a college professor than the first African-American female general to command Fort Hood. The line was long, typical for a Saturday afternoon when soldiers were off duty and running errands. Angela didn't mind waiting. After 30 years in the Army, she'd learned that some of her best insights into base operations came from simply observing and listening when people didn't know who she was. Behind her, she could hear two soldiers complaining loudly about the wait. She didn't turn around, but their voices carried clearly. "This is ridiculous," one said. "Why is there only one register open?" "Budget cuts," the other replied sarcastically. "Can't afford to pay cashiers but can afford a new general. Did you hear? Some diversity hire a woman." Angela remained still, though a slight smile played at her lips. She'd been at Fort Hood for only 3 weeks, and most of the lower enlisted soldiers hadn't met her yet. "Yeah, I heard," the first soldier continued. "Brigadier General Washington, probably never seen real combat. You know how it is, they promote women and minorities to look good." The second soldier laughed. "My squad leader said she's probably one of those PowerPoint warriors, all theory, no practice." Angela pulled out her phone and pretended to text, but she was actually making mental notes. This was valuable, unfiltered opinions from her troops, concerning but valuable. The line moved forward slowly. More soldiers had joined the queue behind the two complainers. Angela noticed an elderly woman with a cane struggling with her basket near the front of the line. That's when things escalated. Staff Sergeant Derek Miller, the louder of the two soldiers behind her, suddenly pushed past Angela roughly, his shoulder shoving her aside. "Move it, lady," he said dismissively. "Some of us have places to be." Angela stumbled slightly but caught herself. She watched as Miller pushed past two more civilians, heading for the front of the line. "Excuse me," Angela said calmly. "There's a line." Miller turned around, looking at her with undisguised irritation. He was big, 6'3", built like a football player, with staff sergeant stripes on his off-duty baseball cap that he wore like a badge of authority. "Listen, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm active duty military. I've been deployed 3 times. I think I've earned the right to skip ahead of some civilians on my own base." "This is everyone's base," Angela replied evenly. "And that elderly woman you're about to cut in front of, she's probably a veteran's widow, that teenager behind her, military dependent. We all wait our turn." Miller's friend, Sergeant Thomas Bryant, joined him. "Lady, do you even know who you're talking to? Staff Sergeant Miller here has a Bronze Star. He's been in firefights in Afghanistan. Show some respect." Angela almost laughed. If only they knew who they were talking to. "I have great respect for combat veterans," Angela said. "I also have respect for basic courtesy and discipline, something that seems to be lacking here." Miller's face reddened. "Look, I don't know if you're some dependent wife who thinks she wears her husband's rank or what, but—" "Actually," Angela interrupted, "I'm someone who believes that character isn't shown by how you treat your superiors, but how you treat people you think can't do anything to you." "Whatever," Miller said, turning away. "I don't have time for lectures from civilians." He started pushing toward the front again, this time more aggressively. A young woman with 2 small children nearly fell as he shoved past. "Sergeant," Angela called out, her voice changing subtly, carrying a note of command that made several nearby soldiers instinctively straighten. "Stop." Miller spun around, angry now. "Lady, you need to mind your own." He was interrupted by a young private who had just walked in and frozen at the sight of Angela. "General Washington," Private Jessica Kim said, her eyes wide. She immediately came to attention, saluting even though they were all in civilian clothes. The entire exchange went silent. Miller's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. "General Washington." Angela returned Private Kim's salute casually. "At ease, Private. We're all off duty here." But Kim remained rigid, staring at Miller and Bryant with horror. "Staff Sergeant Miller, Sergeant Bryant, this is our commanding general, the base commander." Miller's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Bryant looked like he might faint. That's impossible," Miller stammered. You're in civilian clothes, you look like." "Like what, Sergeant?" Angela asked mildly. "Like someone you could push around, like someone whose time isn't valuable, like someone who doesn't deserve basic courtesy." Hash part 2, the recognition. The main exchange had become absolutely silent. Every soldier in the building, and there were at least 20, had stopped what they were doing to watch the unfolding disaster. Several had pulled out their phones, though Angela noticed and shook her head slightly, causing them to lower the devices. Staff Sergeant Miller stood frozen in place, his bravado completely evaporated. His face had gone from white to a sickly green color. "General Washington, I didn't know. I'm sorry, You're sorry you got caught," Angela corrected him. "Not sorry for your behavior, there's a difference." She walked closer to Miller, and despite being nearly a foot shorter, her presence made him step back. "Let me ask you something, Sergeant Miller. If I had been in uniform, would you have pushed me?" "No, ma'am, of course not, ma'am." "If you'd known I was a general, would you have called me lady in that dismissive tone?" "No, ma'am." "So your respect is conditional, based on what someone can do for or to you?" Miller had no answer. Angela turned to Bryant. "And you, Sergeant Bryant, you said I should show respect to Sergeant Miller because of his Bronze Star. I have 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart. By your logic, doesn't that mean you should show me respect?" Bryant's voice came out as a squeak. "Yes, ma'am." "But you didn't know about my decorations when you were talking behind me in line. You called me a diversity hire, said I was promoted to look good. Never seen real combat, was it?" Both sergeants looked like they wanted the floor to open and swallow them. Private Kim, still standing at attention despite being told to be at ease, spoke up. "General, should I call the MPs?" Angela considered it. Military police, official charges. It would end both sergeants' careers instantly. Conduct unbecoming disrespect to a superior officer, arguably assault for the push. "Not yet, Private," Angela said. "Stand at ease before you sprain something." Kim finally relaxed slightly, though she continued glaring at the 2 sergeants like they'd personally insulted her favorite family member. Angela addressed the growing crowd. "Everyone gather around, this is now a teaching moment." Soldiers emerged from different aisles, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes. The store manager, a retired sergeant major, came out from his office. Word was spreading quickly. Soldiers were texting their battle buddies, and more people were arriving by the minute. "I've been in the Army for 30 years, Angela began, her voice carrying easily through the space. "I've commanded units in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've been shot at, blown up, and yes, Sergeant Miller, I've been in firefights, probably more than you, actually." She pulled out her phone and showed a photo to Miller. "Recognize this place?" Miller looked and went even paler. That's Fob Chapman, Afghanistan." 2013, Angela confirmed. "I was a battalion commander. We were overrun by Taliban, 63 enemy fighters. We held for 14 hours. I was on the line with a rifle just like everyone else. That's where I got this." She pulled down her collar slightly, revealing part of a significant scar. "Shrapnel from an RPG, she explained. "Nearly took my head off, but we held. Lost 3 good soldiers that day, saved 47 others." The crowd was completely silent now. Several soldiers had tears in their eyes. "But here's the thing," Angela continued, releasing her collar. "Even if I'd never seen combat, even if I was just a PowerPoint warrior, as you so eloquently put it, I'd still deserve basic human respect. Not because of my rank, but because I'm a human being." She looked directly at Miller. "You have a Bronze Star. Good. You served honorably in combat, but that doesn't give you the right to push civilians around. It doesn't make you better than the dependents, the retirees, or the civilians who support this base." A master sergeant in the crowd spoke up. "General, with respect, these 2 don't represent most of us. Most NCOs would never." "I know that," Angela said, smiling slightly. "But the fact that these 2 felt comfortable acting this way in public tells me we have a culture problem. If they're doing this here, what are they doing in their units?" She turned back to Miller and Bryant. "I want you both to think about something. Every soldier you've dismissed because they're female or a minority or don't look tough enough. How many of them have stories you don't know? How many have sacrificed more than you realize? Ma'am, Miller said, his voice barely audible. What's going to happen to us? Angela let the question hang in the air for a moment. The entire exchange was holding its breath. Everyone knew she had the power to end both soldiers' careers with a single phone call. That depends, Angela said finally. First, I want to know if this behavior is isolated to you two or if it's systemic in your unit. What battalion are you with? 27 Cavalry, ma'am, Miller replied. Angela nodded thoughtfully. She'd already been reviewing that unit. They'd had an unusually high number of EO complaints recently. Equal opportunity complaints about discrimination and harassment. And your company commander? Captain Reynolds, ma'am. Angela pulled out her phone and made a call. Everyone watched in tense silence. Colonel Martinez, this is General Washington. I need you at the main exchange immediately. Bring Captain Reynolds from 27 Cav and command Sergeant Major Thompson. Yes, right now. No, come as you are. She hung up and addressed the crowd again. While we wait, let me tell you all a story. When I was a second lieutenant, fresh out of West Point, I was the only black female officer in my battalion. My platoon sergeant, an old-school NCO from Alabama, took one look at me and said, "I don't take orders from people like you." Several soldiers gasped. I could have ended his career right there, Angela continued. Instead, I worked twice as hard, proved myself twice over, and earned his respect through competence and leadership. 6 months later, that same sergeant took a bullet for me in Iraq, saved my life. She paused, letting that sink in. The point is, prejudice and disrespect can be overcome, but not if we ignore it and not if there are no consequences. A commotion at the entrance announced the arrival of Colonel Martinez, Captain Reynolds, and Command Sergeant Major Thompson. All three were in civilian clothes, Martinez in workout gear, Reynolds in jeans and a t-shirt, and Thompson in golf attire. They all came to attention when they saw Angela. At ease, Angela said. Captain Reynolds, are these your NCOs? Reynolds, a young captain who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, nodded. Yes, ma'am. Are you aware of their attitudes toward female and minority leadership? Ma'am, they're good soldiers, combat veterans. That's not what I asked, Captain. Reynolds swallowed hard. There have been some complaints, ma'am, but I thought it was just soldiers being soldiers. Soldiers being soldiers? Angela's voice could have frozen water. Explain that to me, Captain. I mean, you know how it is, ma'am. Tough talk, military culture. Captain Reynolds, Angela interrupted. I've been in the military longer than you've been alive. Military culture is about honor, respect, and dignity. It's about taking care of each other regardless of race, gender, or background. What you're describing isn't military culture, it's toxic leadership that you've been enabling. Command Sergeant Major Thompson, a black man with 32 years of service, spoke up. General, I've been trying to address these issues in 27 Cav, but I keep getting pushback from middle management. Some of the NCOs think the old Army was better. The old Army where people like us couldn't serve in combat units? Angela asked pointedly. Thompson nodded grimly. Exactly, ma'am. Angela turned to the crowd, which had grown to nearly 100 people now. Everyone from 27 Cavalry stepped forward. 12 soldiers stepped forward, looking nervous. How many of you have witnessed or experienced discrimination, harassment, or disrespect based on race, gender, or other protected categories in your unit? Slowly, 8 hands went up. And how many reported it? Only 2 hands remained raised. Why didn't the rest of you report it? Angela asked. A female specialist spoke up. Because nothing happens, ma'am, or we get labeled as troublemakers. Sergeant Miller there told me last week that women shouldn't be in combat units, that were just distractions. Another soldier, a Hispanic corporal, added, Sergeant Bryant makes jokes about diversity quotas all the time, says promotions aren't about merit anymore. Angela looked at Captain Reynolds. Did you know about this? Reynolds looked at the floor. I heard some things, but you didn't want to rock the boat, Angela finished. You didn't want to be the officer who caused problems, so you let it fester. She turned to Colonel Martinez. Effective immediately, Captain Reynolds is relieved of command pending a full investigation. I want every soldier in 27 Cavalry interviewed, every complaint investigated. Yes, ma'am, Martinez replied. As for you two, Angela turned back to Miller and Bryant, you're both suspended from your positions pending court-martial proceedings. Miller's eyes widened. Court-martial, ma'am. Conduct unbecoming an NCO, failure to maintain good order and discipline, and in your case, Sergeant Miller, assault on a superior officer. But I didn't know you were. Irrelevant. You assaulted someone. The fact that it turned out to be your commanding general just makes it worse. The next morning, Angela convened an emergency meeting of all battalion commanders and command sergeants major at Fort Hood. The auditorium was packed with the base's senior leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, Angela began, standing at the podium in her ACUs, her single star gleaming under the lights. We have a problem. She clicked a remote, and a slide appeared showing statistics. In the last 24 hours following yesterday's incident at the Exchange, we've received 137 complaints about discrimination, harassment, and toxic leadership. 137. That's not a few bad apples, that's a systemic failure. She clicked to the next slide, showing photos of Miller and Bryant. These two NCOs felt comfortable pushing civilians around, making discriminatory comments and displaying complete disrespect in public. That tells me they felt protected, enabled. That stops now. Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, commander of 3rd Battalion, raised his hand. General, are you saying we should lower standards to accommodate? Colonel Patterson, Angela interrupted, her voice sharp. I have a Ranger tab earned in 1995 when less than a dozen women had one. I have a combat infantryman badge. I've scored 300 on every PT test for 20 years. What standards exactly am I lowering? Patterson turned red and sat back down. The only standards being lowered, Angela continued, are standards of conduct and respect. When we allow discrimination, when we turn a blind eye to harassment, when we dismiss concerns as soldiers being soldiers, we destroy unit cohesion and readiness. Command Sergeant Major Thompson stood up. General, may I share something? Go ahead, Sergeant Major. Yesterday, after the incident at the Exchange, I had 43 soldiers approach me privately. Soldiers who'd been suffering in silence because they thought no one cared. Female soldiers who'd been told they didn't belong. Minority soldiers who'd been passed over for promotion despite superior performance. All because of leaders like Miller and Bryant who have been allowed to create toxic environments. Thompson's voice grew emotional. One young private, a Korean-American woman, told me she was considering suicide because of the constant harassment. She said seeing you stand up to those sergeants gave her hope for the first time in months. The room was silent. Several senior leaders looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing their own failures. Angela let the silence stretch before continuing. Every single one of you is going to conduct a climate survey in your units. Anonymous, comprehensive, and mandatory. Any unit that shows signs of discrimination or toxic leadership will be investigated. Leaders who have enabled this behavior will be held accountable. She clicked to another slide showing a photo from her deployment in Afghanistan. Her battalion, diverse in every way, standing together after a successful operation. This was my battalion in Afghanistan. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, male, female, gay, straight, didn't matter. We fought together, bled together, some died together. That's the army I believe in. That's the army we're going to have at Fort Hood. Over the next week, the investigation into 2-7 Cavalry revealed a deep rot. 15 NCOs were relieved of duty. 3 officers, including Captain Reynolds, faced administrative action. Dozens of soldiers came forward with stories of discrimination and harassment that had been ignored or covered up. Miller and Bryant's court-martial was swift. Angela testified personally, not about the push or the disrespect to her, but about the pattern of behavior that had created a toxic environment for dozens of soldiers. These NCOs, she said during her testimony, betrayed the trust placed in them. They were supposed to lead, mentor, and protect all soldiers. Instead, they created an environment where soldiers suffered based on characteristics they couldn't change, their race, their gender, their background. Miller was reduced in rank to Private E1, forfeited pay, and received a bad conduct discharge. Bryant received similar punishment. Both would lose their veterans' benefits. But Angela wasn't just interested in punishment. She instituted base-wide reforms. The Washington Protocols, *. Monthly town halls where soldiers could speak directly to senior leadership. Mandatory diversity and inclusion training designed by combat veterans who understood both the importance and the implementation. A new reporting system that bypassed the chain of command for discrimination complaints. Recognition programs for units that demonstrated exceptional leadership in creating inclusive environments. 6 months after the incident at the exchange, Fort Hood had transformed. The base that had once been known for scandals and toxic leadership was becoming a model for the entire army. Angela stood at the main exchange, in the same spot where Miller had pushed her. But this time, she wore her dress uniform for the occasion, a ceremony recognizing the base's remarkable turnaround. Private Kim, now Specialist Kim, stood beside her. She had been selected as the soldier of the quarter for her courage in standing up and identifying Angela that day, which had sparked the changes. "Ma'am," Kim said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Specialist." "That day, when Sergeant Miller pushed you, were you really going to just let it go if I hadn't recognized you?" Angela smiled. "No, I would have reported it through proper channels, but your recognition accelerated everything. You showed courage speaking up when you saw something wrong." The exchange was packed for the ceremony. Among the crowd, Angela spotted two familiar faces, Miller and Bryant, now civilians, who had requested permission to attend. After the ceremony, they approached her nervously. "General Washington," Miller said, his voice humble, "we wanted to apologize, not for getting caught, but for who we were." Bryant added, "We've been attending counseling, volunteering at the Veterans Center. We're trying to understand how we became so toxic." Angela studied them. They looked different, not just because they were out of uniform, but because the arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been genuine remorse. "I pushed you," Miller continued, his voice breaking. "I pushed a general, a combat veteran, someone who'd earned more in 30 years than I'd earned in 10. But more than that, I pushed a human being just because I thought I could." "We've been talking to other veterans," Bryant said, "telling our story, warning them about what happens when you let prejudice and power corrupt your service. Some listen, some don't, but we keep trying." Angela nodded. "Redemption is possible, gentlemen, but it requires continuous work. Keep at it." As they walked away, Command Sergeant Major Thompson approached. "Think they've really changed?" "Maybe," Angela replied. "But even if they haven't, their story has. Every soldier at Fort Hood knows what happened. They know there are consequences now." Later that evening, Angela received a call from the Chief of Staff of the Army. "Angela, what you've done at Fort Hood is remarkable. Complaints are down 70%. Re-enlistment is up 40%. Suicide rates have dropped by half. The President wants to implement your protocols army-wide." "It wasn't just me, sir. It was soldiers having the courage to speak up, leaders willing to change." "Don't be modest. You turned getting pushed in a store into a revolution in military culture. By the way, you're on the list for your second star. The promotion board was unanimous." After the call, Angela walked through the base. Soldiers saluted as she passed, but more importantly, she saw something that had been missing: genuine camaraderie across all demographics. Male soldiers mentoring female troops without condescension. White NCOs and black NCOs working together without tension. The base felt unified in a way it hadn't before. She stopped by 27 Cavalry's area. The unit had a new commander, Major Patricia Chen, a no-nonsense officer who'd transformed the unit's culture. Where once toxic NCOs had ruled through fear and prejudice, now leaders led through competence and respect. "How are things, Major?" Angela asked. "Night and day, ma'am. We just had our best readiness evaluation in 5 years. Turns out when soldiers aren't dealing with harassment and discrimination, they perform better." "Who knew?" Chen said with a slight smile. Angela visited the barracks, talking to junior soldiers. One private, a young Muslim woman, told her, "6 months ago, I was afraid to wear my hijab off duty. Now I wear it proudly. My squad leader, who used to make comments about terrorists, now asks me about Ramadan so he can adjust training schedules to accommodate my fasting." Another soldier, a gay specialist, added, "I came out to my platoon after you took command. Not only was I accepted, but my platoon sergeant, an old-school guy from Texas, was the first to have my back when someone from another unit made a comment." As Angela prepared to leave Fort Hood for her next assignment, commanding general of a corps-level unit, the first black woman to hold such a position. She held one final town hall. The auditorium was beyond capacity, with soldiers standing in the aisles and watching on screens in overflow rooms. 2 years ago, Angela began, someone pushed me in a store. They pushed me because they thought I was nobody, because they thought they could, because somewhere along the way they'd learned that power meant the ability to dismiss and disrespect others. She paused, looking at the sea of faces, every color, every background, all wearing the same uniform. But here's what that push taught me. Sometimes it takes a shock to the system to create change. Sometimes it takes a general getting pushed to make people realize that if it can happen to her, it can happen to anyone. She pulled up a final slide, a photo of the entire base taken from above, thousands of soldiers in formation spelling out the words respect and honor. This is Fort Hood now. This is what we built together. Not because I'm a general, but because you, all of you, decided that respect isn't conditional. That honor isn't selective. That the uniform we wear means protecting each other, not just from external enemies, but from the prejudices and toxicity that can destroy us from within. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. As Angela left Fort Hood for the last time, she stopped at the main exchange. The manager, the same retired sergeant major from that day, smiled at her. "General, that line where you got pushed, we put up a plaque." He showed her to the spot. A small bronze plaque read, "On this spot, a push became a movement. Respect is not about rank, it's about character." Below it, someone had added in pen, "Thank you, General Washington, for showing us the way." Angela smiled. She'd been pushed out of line by a soldier who didn't know who she was. That push had revealed not just who she was, but who the Army could become. As her staff car pulled away from Fort Hood, she thought about Miller and Bryant, wherever they were now, living with the knowledge that their moment of disrespect had catalyzed the transformation of an entire base. Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. A push in a store had become a push for change that rippled throughout the entire military. And Brigadier General, soon to be Major General, Angela Washington had turned a moment of disrespect into a movement of transformation. The soldier had pushed her out of line, not knowing she was the base's highest-ranking officer. But more importantly, he hadn't known she was exactly the leader the Army needed to push it into a better future.